All right, guys, we are looking at section 9.4.3, and this is part 2 of that. So what we're trying to do here is evaluate trig functions, also find inverse trig functions. These examples say we're going to find the exact measure of theta between 0 and 2 pi. So we're finding these answers in radians. Do not use a calculator except to check your answer if you want. And do not look at your unit circle. You can recreate it as needed. This is just like what we were doing in the warm-ups. We have sine squared theta minus 1 equals 0. So this is going to become sine squared theta equals positive 1. We would now take the square root of both sides, and we would get sine theta equals plus or minus 1. We're trying to find our answers between 0 and 2 pi, which means radians, not degrees. We have to think, what is sine the same as? Is sine x, y, r, what is it? Sine is y. So we want to think on the unit circle, where is it that y is positive 1 or y is negative 1? When this kind of thing happens, we're thinking of these quadrantal angles. If sine or cosine theta equals plus or minus 1 or 0, that's when it's going to be quadrantal. So we're trying to think, where is y positive 1 or negative 1? Well, what's this point here, you guys? 1, 0. What's this point? Does y equal 1 there? Yep. So there's one of our answers, pi over 2. Okay, then we keep going. Is there another place where y would be positive 1 or negative 1? This point right here is negative 1, 0. This point here is 0, negative 1. So what is this angle in radians right here? 3 pi over 2 is right. Those would be your two solutions right there. All right, I want you guys to try number 2 on your own. You can look up here if you get confused, but I want you to see if you can get it. Trying to think, where is x negative 1/2? Brooklyn, do you think you've got it? Do we think it's 2 pi over 3 and 4 pi over 3? Yes, that's correct. The reference angle is 60 degrees. We need to be in quadrants 2 and 3, and so therefore it is 2 pi over 3 and 4 pi over 3. All right, this is number 3, not 2 again. So we're going to have sine squared theta equals 3/4. We're going to take the square root. What do we have to put when we have the square root? Plus or minus. The square root of 3 we can't do. Square root of 4 is 2. Let's see if you can figure out all of these answers. Eva, do you have them? Do you know what the reference angle is? Not sure. Okay, guys, we want to have radical 3 over 2. So we could have this radical 3 over 2. Now, do you know what the reference angle would be? What goes across from the radical 3? 60. So we have a 60-degree reference, and if we have positive or negative radical 3, we're going to have to be in all the quadrants with a 60-degree reference. Anybody have this? All the angles with 60-degree reference? Go ahead, Veronica.
Well, the first one's just 1, and then 2, and then 1.
Good. Some of you get that correct? Okay, good job. All right, now we're going to go to something that people struggle with. You really want to make sure you're paying close attention here. This can be difficult for people. For the notation, arc sine and sine to the -1. Guys, these mean the same thing. If you see arc sine or you see sine to the -1, they both mean inverse sine. Inverse sine means you are looking for an angle in radians over the restricted domain interval that has the ratio of m. In other words, you're being asked, what is the single angle that has a ratio of m over that restricted domain? We need to know what that restricted domain is. For arc sine, arc cosecant, and arc tangent, these three, sine and cosecant are reciprocals. It makes sense they'd go together. Tangent goes along with these two. We restrict the answers to only answers in this interval from -π/2 to +π/2. And we do this so that we just have a single answer, one answer only. Let's take a look at this. Here's -π/2. Here's +π/2. We only use answers in these two quadrants. What quadrants are those? 1 and 4. So we only are going to use quadrants 1 and 4. We're going to write out all the possible answers for arc sine, arc cosecant, and arc tangent. So -π/2 is the same thing as -90. That's one answer we're allowed to use, -π/2. The next one we could use, bless you, would be -60. What's -60? -π over what? 3. Then I can use -π/4. Well, I told you, -π/4. Then we can use -30. What's -30? -π/6. Then we can use 0 as an answer. Then we go into this quadrant. We can use +30 degrees, which is what? π/6. What's the next one? 45 degrees is π/4. 60 degrees is π/3. And then the last angle we can use is π/2. You're going to have to know when you see this right here, the only answers you can give are these 9 answers. One of those 9. One of those 9. Let's go down here and do a problem. Arc sine of 1/2. This is saying what is the one angle from this list that would have a sine ratio of 1/2. If you wanted to use the hand trick that I showed you earlier, I want to get 1, what's the reference angle? 30 degrees, right? So what is 30 degrees from this list? What's equivalent to 30 degrees? π/6. That is the one answer to this, π/6. All right, you guys try this one now. This -1 means the same thing as arc. When you see this right here, it means the same thing as arc sine. Sometimes people think, oh, does this negative mean that becomes positive? No, that's saying what is the angle that has a sine value of -radical 3/2. Figure it out. one answer from this list. Anybody think they know? Do you know the reference angle? What is the angle that has a sine of radical 3 over 2? What's the reference angle? 60 degrees. What's 60 degrees in radians? Pi over 3. Now, if I want to have a negative angle, do I want to be in quadrant 1 or quadrant 4 to get a negative angle? Or to get a negative ratio, sorry, negative ratio. In quadrant 4. So this answer should be negative pi over 3. I have to be in quadrant 4 to get a negative ratio. This is the ratio we're given. This is the angle that such that the sine would be equal to that. All right? Okay, let's go on to the next one. If we have arc cosine, arc secant, arc cotangent, all of that means the same thing as cosine to the negative 1, secant to the negative 1. Those mean the same thing. If we have any of these three, we restrict answers to the interval between 0 and pi in order to have a single answer and thus have a function. What quadrants does 0 to pi, from here to here, what quadrants does that represent? Quadrants what? 1 and 2. We only use quadrants 1 and 2 for these three. We're going to write out all the possible answers we can give for arc cosine, arc secant, and arc cotangent. The first one we can use is 0 radians. The next angle is 30 degrees, which is what? Pi over 6. The next one is 45 degrees, which is what? Then we can use 60, which is pi over 3. Then we can use 90, which is pi over 2. Then we can use 100 and, we're moving on around, 120. 120 has a 60 degree reference angle. So what's it going to be? 120 is 2 pi over 3. Then we go to 135, which has a 45 degree reference. Do you guys know it? 3 pi over 4. Then we go to 150 degrees. That's a 30 degree reference. What is it? Good. And finally we get to pi. We're only allowed to use, it's almost like it's a problem where they tell you you can only use one of these 9 answers. Only one. Now, if our ratio is negative, we're going to be using these. These are the ones we're going to be using if it's a negative ratio we're given. These are the ones we would use if a negative ratio was given. So we use the yellow ones if we have a negative ratio. That really narrows it down as well. Okay, arc secant of negative 1. Well, arc secant is the reciprocal of cosine, so I'm going to change it into cosine. I think it's easier. I'm going to do arc cosine of the reciprocal. Well, the reciprocal of negative 1 over 1 is still just negative 1. So I'm doing this problem. It'll have the same answer as that one because it has the same restrictions. What's cosine the same as? X or Y? So I'm thinking on this unit circle, only between 0 and pi, I'm only allowed to use this section of the unit circle. Where is the spot that I have x equal to negative 1? Pi is correct. Right here, this point is negative 1, 0. That's the only place where x is going to be negative 1. This is called quadrantal when that happens. All right, let's do another one. This means the same thing, guys. What is the angle that has a cosine ratio of 1/2? Which quadrant are we going to be in? We're only allowed to use quadrants 1 or 2, and we have a positive 1/2. Which quadrant if we have a positive 1/2? Quadrant 1. In quadrant 1, do you know what the reference angle would be if x is 1/2? I'm going to do the unit circle this time. We have all these different ways. Do you know it? 60 degrees. But when I'm doing these kind of problems, the answer has to be in radians. So what's the answer going to be? What do you think? Pi over 3. Good. All right. You guys try number 8 now on your own. You should have it by now. Anybody know? Brooklyn, you're making eye contact. You know it? Do you guys agree with 5 pi over 6? Yep, she is correct. That's a 30-degree reference that is on our list. That's a negative ratio. So we use one of these when it's a negative ratio, and 5 pi over 6 is correct. All right. Cosecant, inverse cosecant. Again, when I look at my list, cosecant and sine have the same restriction. So I can just change this to arc sine of -1. Okay? So for arc sine and arc cosecant, I'm only allowed to use one of these answers in between here and here. I want you guys to think about it. Sine is y. Here's your choices up here. And these are the quadrantal ones. You know it has to be quadrantal because I said if arc sine or arc cosine is 0, 1, or -1, you're looking for quadrantals. The first and last or the middle. First and last or the middle, but we're doing these. Okay, you guys should have it. Long, what do you think? Do you guys agree with negative pi over 2? Yes, he is correct. That's quadrantal because it's going to be right here. This is the point, 0, -1. We want y to be -1. That's where that happens. All right, guys, I want you to do 2 more problems on your own. I want you to do arctan of -1, and I want you to do arc cosine of negative radical 2 over 2. Those 2. Eli, what do you think on number 10, arctan of -1?
Is it 3 pi over 4?
Let's look if that's on our list. Arctan is this list. Do you change your mind now?
Yeah.
What do you want it to be instead?
I don't know.
Well, what's your reference angle for 3 pi over 4 that you said before? Okay, so which one of these has a 45-degree reference and gives you a negative ratio for tangent? You got it. Negative pi over 4 is what you should have gotten. Okay. Now, the answer would have been 3 pi over 4 if this would have said arc what? Not tangent, but arc cotangent. See how we do have that on our list for cotangent as one of the options? Okay. All right. And then arc cosine of negative radical 2 over 2. Sophie, do you know it? Let's check and see if it's on our list. Arc cosine, it is on our list. Do you guys agree that that would work? 3 pi over 4, 45-degree reference? Yes, that is correct. That's why I gave you those two, because I wanted you to understand when you use this and when you use that. Okay? All right, guys, good job. What you're going to do for homework is finish that worksheet.